What do you say about fasting? As you've noticed, there was a pause, a gap in the number of days between videos that was unusually long. Well, I was engaged in an exercise the church calls total fasting, which is abstention from all food and water. So, what I did recently was a 5-day total fast, or a dry fast, as medical doctors call it in Russia. No food, no water for 5 days, 120 hours, then a pause of about a week to a week and a half, then another 5-day dry fast, and like that for 4 of them, with intervals between the 5-day total fasts. By the way, a total fast is required by the Typicon of the Orthodox Church of all Orthodox Christians, monastic and laity alike, for the first 3 days of Great Lent and for Great and Holy Friday, the commemoration of the crucifixion of our Lord God and Savior Jesus Christ. That's required for all Orthodox Christians, so total fasting is a commandment, not a 5-day done 4 times in quick succession, but this is a practice I've adopted in my own desire for spiritual purification. The first degree of Orthodox spirituality is purification. Katharsis, a resolution of the emotions, the weakening of the body, as the fathers say, then also weakens the passions, making us a better receptacle for divine grace. And so I was engaged in this exercise in that interval that you noticed, and my voice tends to get weaker during those times, although it comes back stronger after the fast. And then I didn't record as many videos, so you may have noticed that. What do you say about fasting, gentlemen? Have you fasted? Have you fasted from animal foods and oil? A normal practice for Christians. In our time, have you fasted from all food and only water? Have you fasted from all food and all water? A total fast. Have you done this? If you're an Orthodox Christian and you haven't done this, you've simply been disobedient to the Typicon. The Typicon, governing monastics and laity alike, requires this. In our time, even many monks do not obey this commandment. But fasting is first an obedience, and then an action of spiritual athleticism or asceticism. So I was engaged in that practice, and you noticed a gap in the creation of videos. But I say to you, do you fast? Comment below. Do you enjoy fasting? Do you know about fasting? For myself, I have discovered the truth of what the Philokalia says, which is that the highest form of bodily asceticism is to refuse to quench one's thirst, giving up all food and all water. The longest I do at this time in my life is 9 days, no food, no water. There's a video series earlier on the channel where I did record one video every day, despite the weakening of my voice. I wanted to put one of those on camera for the record. And God willing, I hope to do 7 days total fasting, 7 days of eating and drinking, 7 days total fasting, 7 days eating and drinking, and then again 7 days of total fasting. God willing, a 9-day total fast later in the year. Dr. Shenikov, the greatest Russian medical doctor who did most of the primary, most important research on dry fasting, with whose daughter Inga I'm personally in touch, was trained by her father in dry fasting from immediately after her first period, her first menstrual cycle, beginning with a 3-day dry fast, as they say in Russia, or a total fast, to use the Orthodox language. And she said her father taught that in our time, the earth is very polluted, both with environmental toxins and spiritual and psychological toxins, and of course, unnatural electromagnetic frequencies, Wi-Fi routers, power lines, computers, cell phones, laptops, all of this is unnatural radiation, as well as the pollutions all over the world, heretofore unknown to mankind, and then the pollutants embedded into food, the worst being our contemporary version of food sacrifice to idols, which is known as genetically modified organisms, which in Russia is a federal crime because they have enough enlightenment there, even at the level of the state, to know that that is our equivalent in our time of the ancient food sacrifice to idols, which Christians, generally speaking, as a matter of course, would abstain from. Saint Theodore of old being the one who enlightened the Christians not to eat the meat that was sacrificed to idols, but instead to eat the wheat. Well, in our time, the wheat has now been corrupted in many parts of the world, America worst of all, by genetically modified organisms, because the devil wanted to say, well, veganism used to be the recourse historically, so now we'll destroy that too by making the plant foods more toxic than the animal foods. So the devil is the corrupter of all things good, and yet Dr. Shinnikov said if we wish to defeat all of this, to live healthy and well at optimal level of function in our time, he said this is the protocol. Again, his daughter Inga taught this to me herself. She's a middle-aged woman who looks like a much more beautiful young woman, but somehow with the wisdom and maturity of a wise middle-aged woman at the same time. So this is the product of dry fasting, which is a profoundly spiritual kind of asceticism because it is the confrontation of death. Christian martyrs in the early church would do a total fast, abstain from all food and all water to prepare for their martyrdom and their torture so as not to deny the Lord. This is the same thing for us all throughout the history of Christianity, because in the eschaton, at the end of all things, when the Antichrist rules the world, the fathers tell us that at the very end of all things, the Antichrist will control not only all the food, but also all the water. And there will be drones that fly around with water to drink. And all the food that is bought or sold normally can only be bought or sold with the mark of the beast, which incurs damnation, whether taken in the right hand or the forehead. And, Lord have mercy, you may live to see it. Your children almost surely will, but Lord knows. But the Christian tradition of total fasting is that if one cannot abstain fully from both food and water, one will finally succumb to the temptation of having the mark of the beast simply so as to quench one's thirst and eat food and to feed one's babies. So you must be willing to physically die from starvation and thirst, and your children likewise, or at the end of all things, you will succumb to the mark of the beast in order to simply buy and sell to eat and drink. Now, there will be secret food provided to Christians as the Lord wills, if the Lord wills. Just as some martyrs were spared the pain of torture by a miracle and others were not. The Lord knows. But this tradition of total fasting, transmitted down throughout Christian history and actually required by the Typicon, is an obedience. Just as our forefathers Adam and Eve, our ancestors, were forbidden to eat the fruit of this tree. And then they broke that fast, which was the first sin committed by mankind, casting them out of paradise. So the return to paradise necessitates fasting. And Dr. Shinnikov's protocol, he did all the Russian medical research in this, and it's continued. And the work of Dr. Filomov is still alive. You can explore the medical literature online. Much of the Russian research is now translated into English. Only one dry fasting study has been done in the West that I know of. It was a 5-day dry fast. The Western medical doctors seem to have been shocked and surprised and amazed that there were only beneficial outcomes during the total fast, the dry fast, for all of the subjects in the study. So the one dry fasting study done in the Western world and the very many done throughout the 20th century by Russian physicians and medical doctors and scientists discovered that it is only beneficial done rightly, properly applied. So again, Dr. Shinnikov's protocol, 1 36-hour total fast per week. I like to do Thursday evening, 8 p.m. to Saturday morning, 8 a.m. There's our 36 hours per week. 3 days per month. And there's even a formula to determine which are the optimal 3 days, which is an ancient esoteric tradition that I won't share, but you can dig for that if you wish. So, once again, 36 hours a week, 3 days a month, 2 5-day dry fasts per year, and then either 2 7-day dry fasts per year or 1 7-day, 1 9-day. That's a brilliant medical doctor's recommendation. He would also walk barefoot in the forest during these fasts himself. No, that seems a great asceticism, but it is simply, in my understanding, what's necessary for thriving in our time, and the Lord wishes us to thrive. St. John the theologian lets us know, after instructing us on love for God and neighbor, I would that ye prosper and be in health. So, for health of soul and body, total fasting is required by the church. Myself, here's my story. I learned about it on the holy mountain of Athos when I discovered, to my amazement, that Athonite monks really take it quite seriously to keep the 3-day dry fast for the first 3 days of Great Lent and the dry fast of Great and Holy Friday. Most laity seem to have dispensed with that, and most monastics in other parts of the world as well. But that is what the Church requires of all Orthodox, not merely monastics, but laity. The Typicon is clear of this. But the real danger is of denying Christ for the sake of mammon or materiality, simply to buy food and have access to water. In other words, if you cannot abstain from food and drink, it is most likely that you will eventually succumb to the worship of the devil, which is required to receive the mark of the beast, which ensures damnation and prevents spiritual transformation and a return to God. So, in order to avoid damnation, you must learn to dry fast. It's really that simple. That's the eschatological tradition. But it's also an asceticism to defeat the passions now, so as to become a fit vessel for the Lord to fill with his divine grace, if he so will. So it's a part of the precursor to theosis, which the Greek describes as kenosis, emptying. Dry fasting is a wonderful way to empty the body, and it engages a series of processes of purification wherein the body creates its own water from the combination of the stored lipids and the oxygen that is inhaled. The hydrogen comes from the fat. The oxygen inhaled is then internally constructed into H2O. And the Russian physicians have discovered, because they also researched holy water, that the water that the body creates during a total fast or a dry fast has the properties equivalent to holy water. That's how the body makes its own holy water. God built holy water into you. Just like we bless it in church and then drink it, cross ourselves with it, sprinkle it for house blessings, to drive away demons, and invite the grace of God into our lives physically. Well, this is what occurs internally from dry fasting. This was normal for the monks of old, still normative for Athonite monks, at least in some extent. But now, given that the world is so polluted, it's simply a way of being able to be and to be well, not only physically, but also morally and spiritually. So that's what I've been up to. I do beg your pardon for a brief cessation in the creation of videos, and I hope to offer you what I can as consistently as possible. Again, I beg your pardon if it wasn't as consistent as you would have liked, but there was dry fasting, and it's essentially like dying. It is a preparation for death. That's more or less how it feels, but there's a sweetness to it. And the upregulation of positive emotion, the strengthening of prayer is just simply beyond belief in my experience. And there can be experiences in dry fasting that are, let me say, you wouldn't believe it unless you had experienced it. And it's also a practice and a skill. The more it's done, the easier it becomes, although it's never, if you will, easy to deny oneself water. Although it may become easier and for longer periods. So I've been up to a little bit of that. Please comment below on your own experience of fasting, maybe your desire to learn more about it. And remember also that there are three cardinal Christian spiritual practices for all Christians: fasting, prayer, and almsgiving. Fasting to heal the body, prayer to heal the nous, almsgiving, works of mercy to heal the heart. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you for your attention. God be with you.